And it's also team. I think. Yeah. I'm just a little high, but here we go. Let me tell you one thing really quick. So, after the AP exam, I'll just ask that. So a week and a half or 2 weeks after the exam, about a week and a half after the exam, we will have our final, our semester final after the AP exam. And that's really good because since most of you have already taken the AP exam, it'll be fresh in your head. If I wait a month, then it gets further and further back. So that last week and a half or so, I'll fill in any loose ends, because near the end, especially after 1980, I can only do like the highlights. So I'll fill in some loose ends of more modern history, even though once you start getting real close to today, it's hard to do history. It's happening right now, and also our own personal biases will come through. So then we'll have the test, and then after that, well, we'll do a few other things, but then it's just going to be pretty light. The heavy lifting, lots of workout, shoveling, that kind of stuff. It'll be pretty light. Yeah. No, it's different. No, it's like 40. And 41. It's going to be multiple choice matching and a few short items. The second semester test. Oh, wait. There's 2 parts to your second semester test. It'll be multiple choice, a few matching and short items. So it will be a lot smaller, but also multiple choice and matching. And lastly, all the precedents.
Oh my God, that's right.
You have to do all the precedents in
order.
By height, alphabetically by height. Okay, so.
Will it be last name and first name or just last name?
Last name, except unless they have the same last name. Because there's a couple jobs. And their party, height, weight, and I think what else? I think what else? Mother's maiden name and favorite color.
Florida, listen.
Huh?
I don't know the section in the middle that I lost.
Everyone else in the world has
I
to.
memorized in the second grade.
And up here, a girl, 2 years ago, she did all the presidents from memory and height and weight.
Oh my God.
Actually?
Yeah. So I saved this. That's pretty impressive.
She knows how to do.
James Madison, 5'4", 100 pounds.
How did you remember that?
Some of I have memories that work like that. All right, here we go. What are we finishing?
The agrarian revolts, no political.
This look right?
No, we got farther. We got agrarian revolt, no political representation. Good.
Okay. So that's one thing, reform capitalism. Let's review really quick as you write this last thing down. Carnegie Steel, who did he lead to break the union at Homestead? Frick. And what did they do? What was the tactic they used to break the union? What did they call that? Well, they used scabs as one tactic. But what do they call it? A lockout. Scab, lockout. What was the name? Oh, we have propaganda. Who were the people they brought in to protect the scab? Yeah, the Pinkertons, but these private detectives, thugs. Henry Ford would have a crew of just absolute criminals to break up unions. Absolute criminals. And what else? Oh, what happened to Frick? That turned public sympathy away from the union.
Assassination.
And anarchists also would roll a bomb into police officer Haymarket. But who do they blame for Haymarket? Yeah, the Knights. It also led to nativism. So let's get to this. So we got new political system. Oh, what is it called? A political movement to help people who feel left behind by the system. Ordinary working class people who felt like left behind by the elite or the wealthy. Yeah, that's populism. That's populism. And farmers really fit that populism People's Party would be the party they would create, try to kind of move their way into one of the two main parties. Again, we're stuck with two parties. So the agrarian revolt, and their goal is, once again, reform capitalism or else what? If we don't revolt it, the fear was revolution. And they talk revolution all the time. A socialist, anarchist, some kind of class rebellion. They talked about it. And I should add, those with wealth became even more retrenched, fearful of its revolution. We're not going to allow this. And so we're going to have this fear, overwhelming fear of revolution that would go on. And people misuse populists all the time today. It drives me nuts. Are we recording? Yes. So I keep on forgetting, you can check the little red band. Yeah. All right, so let's get through the agrarian problems. Would you like to? Oh, yeah. I just love it's terrifying. So, the number one problem with farmers, we mentioned this before. Remember Shades' Rebellion, we talked about sharecroppers' debt. Farmers are always in debt. Everyone's always in debt, but farmers are so much more susceptible because it takes just one bad year. One drought and they can be crushed. The locusts come through and they're crushed. Things have changed. Have you ever seen a locust? The swarms of grasshoppers that fill the sky. Has anyone ever seen that? Oh, it makes you think the end is near. I've seen it a few times. I've driven through a locust attack. We drove on a road in Wyoming, my dad and I, in an old car. This is many years ago. And there's so many grasshoppers on the road, you couldn't see the road. And there were people sliding off the road because they were sliding on grasshopper guts. And it sounded like popcorn. Because you drive through and all the grasshoppers are at the bottom of the car. And the windshield was covered. We had to pull over because we couldn't see. Good times. So that was that was nothing compared to what in the past. So debt is the big issue, but let's get to the next one, overproduction. And what happened? Remember the boom bust cycle was always the first thing, overproduction. Overproduction. Hey, you're going to try to grow your way out of debt. So that basic factor of the boom bust cycle, grow your way out, but the problem is everyone else does it, so prices drop even more, thus making the debt problem worse. But two more things. More land was put under the plow in these years from the Civil War to World War I. We talked about Homestead Act. A lot of land in the South that was uncultivated, they're going to cultivate it the years after the war to try to make up the debt there. And mechanization. All these new products. So the mechanical reaper, which was invented before the Civil War, became available after. Heck, by the end of the decade, they had steam-powered tractors, which more productivity than having pulling behind a mule. But how do you pay for that? How do you pay for these new machines, which now you can produce more? How do you pay for the land? Where do you get the money? Debt. All debt. Most people could not afford that. So they went into more debt thinking, okay, I'll make up this debt, my previous debt, by going into more debt to grow more. But the problem is everyone else is doing it. Everyone else is doing it too. And so the steam power tractor, they've turned out to be pretty inefficient. Internal combustion engines are common for modern tractors. You remember I told you that story about my great grandfather who had his farm and they were kicked off, became sharecroppers. I told you that story. My dad was born on that farm. And so him, his great grandfathers and great grandfathers, etc. Well, they bought a steam tractor at the turn of the century. Turned out to be not a good buy because they thought it'd be better than internal combustion. They just made a wrong guess on the technology. But they still put all this money in, a massive amount of debt. And my great uncle was like 12 years old, 13 years old, was driving the tractor and drove it into a lake. Yep, there goes the tractor, and they never paid that back. So when farm prices crashed in 1920, that led to them becoming sharecroppers. Yep. My uncle, he was my great uncle, but he was Uncle Hap. And poor Uncle Hap had to live with that for the rest of his life. Stuff, but it's just one of these You put all your money in one thing, you lose it. That's one bad thing. So, most people can't afford it. So railroads. Railroads do something that's called price discrimination. Now, all companies, if they can, do price discrimination. Now, this is the legal term, and I'll explain this once again. But what does that mean? Well, I should have three things here. I think I only have two. Price discrimination are what monopolies do. I'll get to big versus small in just a second. That's monopolies. Monopolies use their monopoly power in price discrimination. And look at it this way. So let's go look at, everyone look at this map real quick here. Here's about 1880, about 1900. Chicago. Chicago had 20 major railroads going into it. Kansas City had just as many. Big rail hubs. So that means you have a lot of competition going into Chicago. Competition does what to prices railroads can charge? Competition. They're competing against each other, so they have to charge less, and someone will take the other railroad. Competition lowers prices. Let's look here. The Great Northern went here. This part of Montana is fantastic wheat growing. To this day, great for wheat. One railroad. See it? What would they charge here? Yeah, exactly right. You think railroads might be a boon for farmers because they give their goods to market? And yes, it is. But railroads have monopoly power. They gouge here to make back for competition. That's monopoly power. That's what we call price discrimination. So when my sister-in-law, Alex's mom, was coming here from, my sister was coming here from Berlin, and she was talking about how it was cheaper to fly from Berlin to Denver than Denver to Helena. Price discrimination. That's monopoly power. Actually, in Helena, it's an oligopoly, but same net effect. So that's monopolies. So whenever you hear price discrimination, that means using your monopoly power to either raise prices or remember monopsony or producer prices down. That's monopoly, that's price discrimination. But railroads, would they charge more for a big customer that filled up like every train? Would they charge more, every car in a train? Or would they charge more for small customers? We just put a few in a boxcar. Which one did they charge more per ton of good ships? A lot more for small. A lot more. So small farmers have to pay more than the big ones. Is it like that today? Absolutely. Absolutely. Everyone got that? Big pays less. And they would work out deals. Amazon pays less than small stores. It's the same thing. And so they have this competitive advantage. It's called, that's price discrimination. But it happens all the time. It's technically illegal, but you have to enforce the law. We'll add one more. Long versus short haul. Add long versus short. Do they charge more per ton for shipping a good a long distance, like from Seattle, Chicago, or short distance, Missoula? Which one do they charge more per ton, long or short? Lot more short. A lot more. Ideally, what the Northern Pacific Santa Fe, I'm sorry, Burlington Northern Santa Fe would like to do, now they have all these lines. It started from the Great Northern. Load it, like container cars in Seattle, and not have to stop and unload till they get to Chicago. So they only have to pay to unload it once. Pay once, don't break a bolt. But once, unload or load, unload, one time each. So 55 years ago, trains carried everything. So you'd have a train full of boxcars, and it would come to Helena and about 3/4 of the food would be shipped on train. So they would stop in Helena and they would unload the train for what they needed and they shipped to the grocery store. That was all done by truck. Railroad just gave that up for the efficiency money of long versus short. Railroads don't do that at all anymore. It's really inefficient. It's more expensive to ship by car or by truck. And it's so it's more expensive, and it's about 100 times more CO2 per year. But anyway, that's the way it used to be. So they didn't want to do that. They want to pay them. But one thing about this, today there's one railroad. one railroad in Montana, basically. Burlington, Morgan, Santa Fe, it's a monopoly. Basically, this whole area. But in Kansas, there were 3 railroads now. Anybody want to guess what they charge? Burlington, Northern Santa Fe goes to both. What they charge here or here to ship wheat. Anybody want to guess? Today, on average, 10 times good. Think about Montana farmers. They could have a bumper crop and still not make any money. So that's going to happen with debt. Here's a farmer warning people they're going to be crushed by the train. And as ties, that's pretty clever. But are they paying attention? Are they listening? You know, they read the paper, read a book, not paying attention. People warned it's going to happen. It won't be that bad. It turns out to be that bad. Next, deflation. Everything here was deflation. So either low inflation or actual deflation this whole entire time. Deflation means you're paying back money of greater value. This really hurts debtors. But it goes right back to the gold standard. The Coinage Act of 73, farmers called the crime of 73. That forced the gold standard. But not only that, what's the tax on imports? Tariffs. They have regressive taxes. Regressive means the poorer you are, the lower your income, the greater percentage in taxes you pay. Tariffs nail working people and small farmers. Actually, pretty much everybody who's at the bottom, 95%. But it's a big tax cut for the very wealthy. Here is protectionist tariffs, and they're feeding this, and who's getting the benefit? The milk? Big business, because what do tariffs do to all prices? Raise them. One more thing, to be clear about this. One more time. Tariffs are paid by the importer. The exporting country or business do not pay the tariffs. It's paid by the importer. So when goods are shipped into the United States and we have a tariff, it's paid by whoever is buying those goods, the first importer in the United States. They pay the tariff. That raises prices all throughout the United States because then they pass on that tax to consumers. Foreign countries do not pay the tariff. Foreign business does not pay the tariff, but it raises prices, so it makes it very difficult for them to import. Or difficult for them, to export to the United States. If anyone says that foreign countries are paying the tariff, they're doing one of two things. They're wrong and have no idea what they're talking about. Or what? They're lying. I think both are kind of bad. So if anyone says, another country will pay it, like at this time, Britain is paying the tariff. No, the country it's sent to pays the tariff. So back to this. That's what we call basic economics. That you guys should know in high school. People, about that shit. Should too. I put in parentheses. What do farmers want then? Farmers want inflation. Farmers want prices to go up. They want greenbacks, so paper currency, not based on gold, or more coinage of silver. Silver, there's a lot more silver than gold. So let's mint gold, a silver coin. They call it bimetallism. And lastly, these are the basic problems. But all these problems stem back to one big one: more debt. Every one of these problems makes the debt situation worse. And debt will hang over them. People in a great amount of debt, it's a crushing blow to them after debt, a crushing anxiety over debt. You owe a lot of money. That's really all you think about. People and businesses are not like governments. We can't raise taxes and we don't have an army. I guess if we do, then I guess our country's over. Then it turns into anarchy. So, don't write this down, but this is the price index. So this is the inflation rate. This is the basic level of prices. Prices kind of went down through much of the last part. This are farm prices. And farm prices then were pretty high. So what this means is farm prices were higher than the average price. But look what happens by the end of the century. Farm prices are lower. And so farmers by the end of the century were being crushed. Why were they higher there? Getting back production after the Civil War. So more is it the production, there was a shortage of food because so much land was out of cultivation. All right. So farmers have tried first to try to get into the political arena, nonpartisan, not by parties. What started as a social group called the Grange soon became political. And they're going to go for a series of state laws. And they would support whatever party would support them. So this is, we will support Republicans or we will support Democrats if they push for laws we like. The Granger laws would regulate railroad rates. They would routinely regulate railroad rates. Watch. I want as much alliteration as possible. Only within the states. So this would end price discrimination, which I talked about earlier. So for example, in Indiana, the Grange dealt with the Republican Party. Same with Ohio. They're very Republican. But then in Iowa, the Grange dealt with the Democrats. The Democrats were more dominant parties. Whoever dealt with them. And they saw this as working with the two-party system. Naturally, they made them weaker for a number of reasons. I should add, the Grange started as a social group. Farmers were very isolated. And so they would form a Grange in local areas. They'd pitch money in and build like a big Granger hall. They have like dances and so on. Because, farmers are isolated. It's lonely. There are Granger halls all over Montana. If you go to rural areas, they'll have dances and things like that. The old Granger hall. Companies from Montana. I've been to a few of those kind of things. So back to this. What happened was immediately railroads sued. And in court case Munn versus Illinois, it said it's constitutional to regulate railroad rates in states, interstate trade. But the Constitution, and remember, this was a whole compromise, the slave trade compromise. Interstate commerce is regulated by the federal government. So there was the Illinois Central Railroad Trust had a railroad called the Wabash Railroad. If you look right here, the Wabash Railroad was basically this. It went from Chicago to Peoria, Indianapolis, and back to Chicago. It's basically that. The small little railroad, if you swallowed up by the Illinois. So what the Wabash Railroad began to do is they're shipping goods from Peoria to Chicago. See that? They go to Indianapolis. Cross state borders and then cross back. Well, Illinois tried to have their Granger laws regulate the rates. And they said, no, you can't regulate the rates because it's interstate commerce. Went to the Supreme Court in a case that everyone just calls the Wabash Railroad case. And it said, this is interstate commerce. States can't regulate this. And this devastated the Granger laws. They're going to be thrown out in most states. This crushed the Grange as a political movement. I mean, the Grange is going to go on, but never have the same power. I mean, this was just a devastating blow to them. And it showed one thing very important. Only the federal government. And that means if farmers want anything done, only the federal government can do this. Only they can regulate monopolies, regulate railroad rates, or for that matter, regulate worker safety, food safety, and later on environmental laws. Only the federal government. State governments are not strong enough because of interstate commerce. Well, and both parties, they feel, are abandoning them. Don't forget that on the national level. One more thing. The Grange did do a few things that survived. So farmers have a worry about how do you store grain. They would set up warehouses, granaries, for example. So low rent to rent grain, or to rent places to store grain. They would also set up their own department store to ship goods to isolated farmers called Montgomery Wards. It used to be a really big department store. It's gone now. And one more thing. What about insurance for crops? Flood, drought, whatever. They set up an insurance company to insure farmers. Still around. What's it called? Cleverly called Farmers Insurance. And that was started by the Grange. So, same problems today as then. Now they've kind of moved away from the Grange and it is a It is a corporation, but it started just to help farmers. So the big thing is the farmers feel more ignored than ever before. At the national level, they feel totally ignored. Part of it was city governments were growing radically different political systems than what was going on the farms. In urban areas, radically different political movement. They're growing so fast and so haphazardly, it was blowing up the old political order. And in the wake of that came the political machines. Urban areas were overcrowded beyond belief. Rent prices were out of the world. And there's internal migration, farmers either kicked off the farm or kicking their children off. Remember, mechanization, you don't need as big a family. We already talked about that once before. I mean, there's stories about just all these urban, or rural people coming to the big city just being overwhelmed, preyed upon by people in the big city. Especially young women and immigrants from other countries. And so you have this massive overcrowding. There was really no planning. You go to some of these big cities, you can tell there's just kind of haphazard roads. It's just all kind of built up. They might go like after the fact, try to improve it, but it's just really haphazard. A small version of this is compare the area around Last Chance Gulch to the rest of Helena. All of a sudden, you always saw somebody from out of Helena going through downtown Helena. All of a sudden, they don't do one-way streets and things don't make sense. They stop and they get yelled at by people who live in Helena. Get moving. Those people always seem to be driving through downtown Helena at about 7:30 in the morning. AKA when I'm going to work. And they're like stopping and looking at every one-way stop. Like, what are you doing? All right, moving on. I'm complaining about all the difficulties of my life. That caused me to be 1 minute later to school. Okay, moving on. So there were no real services. Remember I told you there was no police departments till the 1820s. Now it's just not Christmas. Now Reconstruction, after Reconstruction, those prison quotas would come about. But there were no services. And so there were private fire departments that you have to pay to come to get fire insurance. And they were basically just looting operations. They'd start little fires and loot. There was no public fire departments. There was no public sewer system. There was no public water system. There was no public garbage collection. Can you imagine New York City in 1880? 4 million people. 6 million horses. No garbage collection. There's stories of people having to cross over 5 or 6 feet of just rubbish just across the street. Could you imagine the mounds of manure all over? So when it's rain, there'd be just puddles of running. Just imagine it. Or when it's dry, it would turn into this powder that would get into everything. Everything. Like into the rings of jars. They would have that manure dust. City life. That's why they thought cars would be such a big deal. Cut back on the pollution, it'd be so much cleaner. All right, but I mean, I guess I can understand their point of view. Well, who provided these services? Or for that matter, schools, parks, you name it. Well, who stepped into the void? The political parties. The political machines did that. So the Democratic Party in New York said, okay, we will do these. We will provide these services. We will create a garbage collection service, public fire department, public police, public sewers, public water. We will provide those things. Paved roads, gutters, drainage systems. I mean, they dug out the sewer system based on the London sewer system. They dug all this. Eventually, the city would take over like subways and mass transit. They would provide all these services. Uneven, not perfect. All they asked in return, the vote. Remember who did it. So New York City, members of the Democratic Party who met in this place called Tammany Hall, they would meet, for example, they go to the train stations and these people come in, these scared migrants, and they meet them there. So let me find you a place to live. Let me help you get a start. Find people kind of like you so you don't feel totally out of place. I'll help you find a job. Just remember who helped you. A boat would arrive from Italy with immigrants in the 1880s. Somebody from the Democratic Party would meet them, speaking Italian. Let me help you out. Let me find you a place to live. I'll get you something. This is retail politics. I'm helping you. The Democratic Party did all we want, and they remember, vote for us. Vote. Vote. That's how politics work. You provide a service that people need. Politics, that's what that is. They make the rules, they provide services. Oh, and one more thing. When we steal from the government, just don't bother looking, okay? Vote for us and don't watch out for the graft. Graft is stealing from government, taking from government contracts. The biggest example of this, everybody write down kickbacks. Kickbacks is a form of bribery. So what happened is they would give city governments in New York, Tammany would give contracts to build all these parks and sewers or this new garbage collection. And they would hire this out to private companies, and the private companies would overcharge. For example, to build this magnificent marble covered city hall in New York City. Cost about $1 million to make. A lot of money back in 1869. It's nothing today, right? Obviously, we have $1 million burning a hole in our pockets today. I get it. But they charged $10 million to build it. That's graft. And then what did they do? The contractor took that money and then kicked the money back. Here's your little taste to the politicians. Remember? Give the contract, scratch my back, I scratch your back. So a kickback is giving money back to politicians. Now, this is outright bribes. I mean, and they didn't really hide it. Here you go. I think the bribery that happened in early Montana history is kind of mind-boggling. Literally handing out envelopes of money right in the open to members of the new Montana state legislature. Remember, the Anaconda Company vote for them. Does it happen today? All the time. All the time. It's done a little bit differently now. You know, like, do you provide me this job? Or you don't turn your back on regulation? Your kickback will be a really lucrative job when you're retired from government. So, I think it's still out. Tammany Hall then was New York. They were the Democratic machine. They ran New York City. So Tammany, that's kind of a bastardization of a local tribe there, and this big hall, and they would meet there. And it wasn't the elected officials, it was the leader of the party they literally called a boss. Boss William Tweed, right here. Now, Thomas Nast, the cartoonist who brought us Santa Claus and the elephant for the Republican Party, he wrote about the corruption, the graft of the machines. And he had all these cartoons of Tweed. Here he is controlling the ballot box. Heck, when people would go to an election in New York City, people would line up and they would go through it, they would hand you a ballot. This is how you're voting. The ballots, you wouldn't actually vote for individuals. New York City, they all go through and have green pieces of paper. They just, here's your, here it is, here's your ballot, green piece of paper. You go into the ballot box, that jar represented, even though it wasn't a jar. And they just counted the green pieces of paper. If it's green, they voted for every Democrat. If it's red, they voted for every Republican. So just green paper. And that's how they did it. In open, this was public ballot, so when you voted, everyone got to see who you voted for. Sure, there was no intimidation at all. AKA, always intimidation. That's why secret ballot was such a big reform. So, Boss Tweed would eventually get caught in one of a blatant bribery scheme. He replaced by William Plunkett. And Plunkett referred to it as honest graft. Hey, yeah, I'm stealing money, but we're building big, good things. We built parks, sewers, garbage collection. Isn't that good? That's honest graft. And that's what he called it. So why are we talking about machines here? And you know the complexities of urban, especially urban 18th century politics, but is this helping farmers? This is a totally different structure. These are Democrat. Most of the machines are going to be Democrats because this goes back to the Jacksonian support of immigrants. But there will be Republican machines too. That's Plunkett. And I just love having no face, it's just dollar or money back. Are machines good or bad? I would say the answer is yes. They're both, aren't they? They provided services that did not exist. But not only were they corrupt beyond belief, the machines are only remain in power as long as the people coming in remain poor and dependent upon them. So they will help some, but they have a vested interest to keep things the way they are. You dependent upon us. So it's complex, isn't it? And the legacy of these machines still go on. So for example, Philadelphia, Boston, Democratic machines. The entire state of Ohio is Republican. Still is. The Democratic Party of Ohio, I mean, mess is not even strong enough a word. It's always been. Marcus Hanna, at the turn of the century, ran Ohio. He ran for the Republican Party. In fact, he became so powerful because Ohio was such a key state that he could pick the president by 1896. He could pick the Republican nominee. That's power. One person. California, like Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Diego, all Republican machines. Well into the 1960s and 70s, California was a Republican-controlled state to the 1990s. That's not that long ago. Those of you who follow politics today, know that California is a very Democratic state. That's very recent. So, what about the rest of the national level? Well, in 1880, we have a presidential election. So we had 1876, that's Hayes, that's bargain and Reconstruction. The Democrats think we finally got our guy. They nominated, Winfield Scott Hancock, the hero of the Battle of Gettysburg. Remember, the Democrats were tainted with the Civil War. How could you say the Democrats aren't loyal to the country when they pick one of the great heroes of the United States, Winfield Scott Hancock? He was a Democrat. So you have this interesting thing where you have Southern Democrats, many of them were former Confederates, supporting a Union general. Should add, there were a few Confederates that looked back and went against the Confederacy in support of Republicans, like General James Longstreet, Lee's probably best general. But he could never go back to the South after 1876. They would have. So back here, the Republicans completely divided. The issue is patronage, the giving of government jobs, because this is becoming big business. People would support the person running for president and the demand a lucrative job, like running the customs house collecting taxes. Lots of kickbacks there. So stalwarts were the ones who wanted to keep the system going. Of this, every government job would be open to the highest bidder or absolute loyalists. Half-breeds wanted some kind of reform. Now, in our textbook, they called stalwarts conservative Republicans. That's really not quite true. By 1880, the Republican Party, which wasn't like this in 1860, this is not the same party as Lincoln, had become both very laissez-faire, more and more they're calling it conservative economics. Laissez-faire and social Darwinistic. Very much so. So the party of Lincoln had made a shift. And the Civil War kind of blew everything up. And that old legacy of free labor began to take over. At their nominating convention, they couldn't pick anybody. Grant actually showed up and tried to lobby people to get him elected president or get him nominated again. And they decided we can't go with Grant. He's still tainted by that credible Moliere scandal. But they finally nominated James Garfield, who was considered an incorruptible and relatively unknown congressman from Ohio. What do you call an unknown? Yeah, he's a dark horse. He's a Civil War hero, like Hayes, and absolutely incorruptible. In fact, he was considered kind of an aberration. While he was in Congress, normally they would stay there for the 3 or 4 months that they're in session. Today, members of Congress live there year-round. They get a house there, live there, because it's year-round. Every weekend, when he was in Washington, D.C., he kept this going as president. He would go back home. So on Friday, he'd go to the train station, take the train back to Ohio to be with his wife and kids who had a little farm outside of Columbus, Ohio. Then come back on Sunday night on the trains. Every weekend, went to be with his family. He's kind of an aberration then. So incorruptible. He didn't say it, but he sympathized with the half-breeds. But to satisfy the stalwarts, they picked the definition of corruption and patronage. Chester A. Arthur. He wasn't even an elected official. He was the head of the customs house collecting tariffs in New York City. And he was getting all kinds of kickbacks to turn his back on that tax coming in. He would get incredibly rich. Well, this was a bitter election. Here, Garfield, and they try to show, we're not going to really talk about the stalwart here. And here's Hancock, weighed down by Democratic secessionist sympathies. And a couple things. We're jumping right to here. The Democrats were hit through by the bloody shirt again. Waving the bloody shirt. Republicans would accuse them of causing the death, the blood of Union soldiers. And here is kind of attacking that as rabble rousers. Garfield didn't want to use it, but here other, this is James G. Blaine. They're forcing Garfield to use the bloody shirt. That's pretty nasty politics. Especially, think about calling Winfield Scott Hancock, the hero of the Battle of Gettysburg, a traitor. Just gruesome politics. But don't forget, Republicans, the new Republican Party started calling George Washington a traitor. And it goes on to this day. When the election finally happened, I found a map that had red for Republicans and green for Democrats, because those were kind of the colors of the political machine in New York City. Solid South went for the Union General. Isn't that weird? But Garfield won in the Electoral College and won enough of the popular vote. Remember, the popular vote doesn't matter. But almost immediately, Garfield's going to be inundated with job seekers. People lined up day and night to get a job. Everyone got that? Lined up day and night. Oh, almost forgot. Near the bell. What's Sunday? Oh, yeah. That's Super Bowl IV. That's the Chiefs' victory at Super Bowl IV. I remember this game, 1970. That's the MVP, Len Dawson. I just want to remind you the Super Bowl is coming up. And I know for those of you who don't care, you have to care now. Because if the Eagles win, your test on Monday will be the most brutal thing you've ever taken. Justice must prevail. Who wants the Chiefs to win? Let me rephrase that. Who wants to pass? Yeah, you want the Chiefs to win. See, I'm not opposed. And I will blame all of you personally if the Chiefs lose. Everyone write down, if you didn't get this right, write down Garfield was inundated with job seekers. They would line up, they would come to the White House and literally knock on the door asking for a job. Isn't that weird to imagine? Imagine going to the White House today and knocking on the door. Just go rattle the fence and see what happens to you. Of course, since they've given offers to resign to pretty much everybody in the government, there might be no guards anymore. So we might be able to sleep in the Oval Office. Who knows what's going to happen? AI will stop us. Who do we won the Super Bowl? Big, right?
Kendrick Lamar.
Not even time.
I still haven't watched the halftime.
There's few things I hate more than the halftime show. It's Spy. I don't care who it is. My favorite musician did have it on show years ago. That's so.
Did Garfield was even more right?
Oh, Garfield was kind of. He was kind of the last dance speaking about a little bit more workers' rights. He wasn't.
But not looking huge at it.
Yeah. He was kind of a half-breed.
Since like the Republican and Democratic Party now back then is like switched, it kind of confuses me a little bit.
But it didn't switch totally.
Yeah.
The main elements of the roots, especially the Democratic Party, would remain. You know, about being the party of the common man. That would remain, but how you achieve that and became a big step. But you're right. It is weird. But the main elements of it, the answer is no. I don't care, no. Why are you going? Oh, on to Vegas, huh? And do what?
Skiing.
So you're going skiing and then off to Vegas. And you want me to do extra work to help. Okay, so we'll, I'll give you the review this on Monday. So I'll be finishing up the last of it. There might be one reading for each of them, and then I have to test with them. And so this has to be on Tuesday, on Monday, and stuff. We'll just see where it's at. But we're gonna be all the way through chapter. Hey, chapter one, I think chapter one. Sound good? But thank you for letting me know.
I figured out my ball. So I was watching like your videos and then I was watching mine. I was like, I take off my arms like this, like oh yeah, they even jump. Then your arms keep going straight. And I watched the videos and I watched a video on YouTube. And they were saying like if you do that, like what I keep doing, you're gonna
Don't fight.
and then you do that. And like this is gonna go like this. So I think that's my problem.
So we have to.
For a lot of them.
We'll have fun though. I mean, that's fun. And I know you'll make it up. There's no. It's a big day, everybody. Farmers. Farmers and political machines. Lots of stuff today. What?